Introductory Neuroscience and Neuroinstrumentation. This is a demo on the action potential, and this is a complement to the lecture on action potentials. Okay. So again, we are using the same meta-neuron program made by Drs. Newman and Newman from the University of Minnesota. It's a free neuron simulation program for teaching cellular neurophysiology, and it was published in the Journal of Undergrad Neurosci Education, June 2013. So it's a free standalone program that can be used without restriction, and it's used to conduct neurophysiology experiments in silico. It works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. With Linux, it works via Wine. Okay. And as mentioned earlier, different neuronal parameters like potassium-sodium concentrations, equilibrium potential, and conductances can be easily modified. And a virtual simulator injects single or double current pulses into the neuron. So responses are displayed graphically and can be measured with a cursor, and you have family of traces that can be easily generated and viewed in rotatable 3D plots. Okay. So this is actually the easy one because the earlier demos were on the resting membrane potential, tau and lambda. These are kind of esoteric concepts, but the action potential, the good old action potential, is something which is everyone knows, and this is how axons work. So this is far easier to understand. So this demo shows how voltage and time dependent sodium and potassium conductances generate the action potential. This model is based on the Hodgkin-Huxley equations, and for which they got the Nobel Prize. And the sodium conductance represents fast TTX, tetrodotoxin sensitive sodium channels. The potassium conductance represents the delayed rectifier, or the delayed rectifier potassium channels. So all the parameters controlling the sodium, the potassium, and leak conductances can be adjusted, and we can adjust the equilibration potentials of the respective ions. So these values control the driving force of ions through their respective channels. And the sodium, potassium, and leak conductances, the maximum conductances, represent the actual sodium, potassium, and leak channels in the membrane. So that's very interesting, that you can have a physical quantity like a conductance representing the number of ionic channels studded in the phospholipid cell membrane. Okay. Then we can use channel blockers. So the presence of TTX and tetraethyl ammonium can selectively block channels. The sodium channel is exquisitely sensitive to TTX, and when you use TTX, all sodium currents are blocked. Similarly, the potassium channel is sensitive to TEA, tetraethyl ammonium, and when you use TEA, that blocks the potassium channels. However, it does not block the leak conductance, which still remains. Another important parameter is temperature. When you raise the temperature, you reduce the time constants controlling the sodium conductance activation and inactivation, and the potassium conduction activation, resulting in faster action potentials. Now you may say, why is this important? This is important because in a condition like multiple sclerosis, you have conduction failure because the myelin, if you remember, the axon and the myelin, which is the insulation layer of the axon, that degrades because of an autoimmune pathology in the body. So the thresholds go down, the conduction goes down. So just by cooling the body or cooling the axon, you can have it reaches threshold, and you have some amelioration of the symptoms. So here you can actually see it when you change the temperature, how the time constants also change. Okay. So the activation of a neuron. Now here you have the active conductances, which are not there in the earlier three tutorials. So the activation of the neuron is controlled by several stimuli. Stimulus 1, the delay, width, and amplitude of this current pulse can be adjusted, and likewise stimulus 2 when it's on. Then you can use holding current. This is a continuous current source which can be used alone or together with the current pulses. And the conductances of the sodium and the potassium can be displayed along with the membrane potential when you choose the appropriate boxes. Right? So some of the different exercises you can do is, you can vary the action potential threshold by varying the amplitude of the stimulus. So you can vary, see the effect of varying the sodium equilibrium potential on the action potential. Then you can see the effect of sodium channels and action potential initiation by varying G Na max, which G stands for the conductance of the sodium through the membrane, and it actually G Na max reflects the sodium channel density, because the sodium channel density is proportional to its conductance, its maximum conductance. You can also look at the refractory period. If you remember the refractory period, an action potential, once a neuron generates an action potential, for a couple of milliseconds after, whatever the current you give, it's not going to stimulate another action potential. And then for a little time after that, so that is the absolute refractory period. For a little time after that is the relative refractory period, when you can get an action potential, but you have to use a huge supra threshold current. And then after that it comes back to normal. So you can study those phenomena by using two stimuli. And then also you can see the effect of the action potential, membrane conductances and currents, on the shape of the response. So this is the metaneuron displaying lesson number 4, which is the axon action potential, not dendrite but axon. So here, unlike, as I said, the previous demos, you have active voltage conductances, and it kind of looks a little plump. So we shall change the sweep duration, okay, so that it's a more tractable. Okay, that's how it's usually displayed. So here you see the action potential in all its glory. So just to reiterate, the red trace is the stimulus in microamps. The membrane potential reaches threshold with this level of stimulation and gives rise to the action potential. So this is the upstroke, this is the downstroke, and then it goes below its resting membrane potential. So this is the this is depolarization, and this is hyperpolarization, and then after hyperpolarization, then it comes back to normal. Okay, so you have membrane parameters over here. This is the sodium, and the most important ion in the resting membrane potential is potassium, but here it's sodium. Okay, and the sodium equilibration potential is set at 50. So the conductance, G max, which reflects the number of sodium channels, is kept at 260. Likewise, the potassium equilibration potential is minus 77, and the G max is 70. Okay, and the green trace reflects the sodium equilibration potential at these concentrations. The blue line reflects the potassium equilibration potential, again at these concentrations. Okay, and these are the reversal potentials for the membrane leak, so we can ignore it. And here right now we can also show the ionic conductances, and we can show the ionic currents. We're right now doing none of that. We're just showing the membrane potential as it changes, and holding current we're not changing. This is stimulus 1. It's on right now, and there's a delay of 0.5, so it starts 0.5 milliseconds from the beginning of the sweep. Its width is 0.1 milliseconds. This is 0.5 milliseconds, 0.1 milliseconds, and the amplitude is 65 microamps. Okay. So let's start with blocking the sodium current. So here TTX, that's it. The sodium current is blocked. There is no action potential. Okay, I've taken off the TTX blockade, and you have the action potential. So now let's block the potassium. So we hit TA, and again there is no action potential, but the membrane potential has gone up to around about 0. Okay, get it back. So let's go back to defaults, because for the ionic conductances and ionic currents, it's easier to see when it's a little expanded. So now nothing has changed. We've just changed the sweep duration. We've decreased it from 20 to 5, which is the default position. So let's see what happens to the sodium and potassium ions when we show the ionic conductances. Okay. The sodium conductance is this green guy, okay, and the potassium conductance is this blue guy, okay, the trace, not guys, trace. So right at the beginning of the upstroke, of the action potential, the conductance for the sodium increases too. So it goes up and then it inactivates, it comes down. The potassium conductance on the other hand, and that's why it's called a delayed rectifier, it takes off more slowly. Okay, it's much slower, so it's delayed. And then it lasts for a much longer time, right till the end of the action potentials after hyperpolarization, and comes back to normal. So these are the conductances. This is actually, in a way to think of it is these are channels which are opening. These are sodium channels which are opening, causing the sodium conductance to change. Opens rapidly, deactivates, inactivates rapidly. This is the potassium conductance which is opening. Opens much slower and doesn't really deactivate. It keeps going on until the end of the action potential. Okay, so these were the conductances. So let's look at the currents. Okay, let's take off the conductances. Again, conductances are the actual channels. How they are opening and closing. Now let's look at the currents which are passing through these conductances. Okay, so this green line is the inward going below inside the axon, inward sodium current. Okay, and this blue line is the potassium outward current going out. So this inward current causes the action potential. Remember, this is current while the action potential is voltage. Okay, and you have this massive inward current. Actually, you can't see it really well over here. I'm going to change the duration. Yeah. So you see this massive inward current over here, which is the sodium current, and you also have a potassium current starting a little later, and so the combination of these two currents, their interplay, gives rise to the action potential. Okay, so let's go back to normal. So what happens when you change the temperature? Okay, so let's look at a range. Okay, so when you change the temperature, and the range is, the begin value is 7, the end value is 21. These are physiological, in the physiological range, and you're incrementing it by 1. So let us change this to something a little more sensible. Okay, so that you can see this. So at different temperatures, you see, what happens, and as the temperature changes, the initiation of the action potential also changes. Easier to see with a 3D graph. So if you look at a low temperature, 7-ish, 8-ish, it takes a little time to activate, and then it comes down, and it's much more broad. Well, if you look at a higher temperature, 20, 21, it takes off much faster and comes down baseline much faster. A surface plot is kind of helpful over here, so you can actually see it. So this is at a low temperature, and you can see at a higher temperature, it's much narrower. You can see that part over there, so it's much narrower. Okay. Much narrower over here, much broader over here at a low temperature. Okay. So a practical point is that when we do experiments, it is critical that we keep the temperature constant. And typically with squid, they keep it at 16 degrees. And if you're doing mammalian experiments, 18 degrees. Because when you change the temperature and if it's not held constant, your results will vary considerably, as you can see. And especially if you're recording from a local field potential stimulation, kind of data, it's not just one neuron, it's multiple neurons, a whole network, and everything changes. So this is critical. And the other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the ways of treating multiple sclerosis is lower the temperature so the thresholds go up. All this is given in great detail in the papers as well as the exercises. So I encourage you to check it out. And I'll just restore things to baseline. And yeah, there's one final thing I'd like to show you in the action potential demo. We will change this again to 10. Okay, and then I will put on another stimulus. Okay, so you have one stimulus giving rise to one action potential. So I put another stimulus over here. Okay, and now you have nothing, and you have nothing because this is during the absolute refractory period of the axon. So it will not fire. The sodium inactivation prevents it from doing that. But what happens if I change the delay? So I change the delay to 10. Oh, we can't see it because it's over there. Let's make this 20. Yeah. So I've changed the delay to 10. So 10 meaning, 10 from here, from here to here, it's 10. And then you see the action potential being fired by the second stimulus. Okay. And what happens if I get it to an intermediary path? So this is where, the range kind of helps. So we won't do that. What we will do is we will change the delay to 7. You still see it. To 5, there you don't. But in 5, if you increase the amplitude to 100, you get it. So what we have done here is we have forced the axon to fire again, even though it's refractory, but this is the relative refractory period. So with increase in current, amplitude of the current, it fires. But if it goes, if you use the standard current like here, it doesn't. Okay, but there is a limit. Okay, when you make it even shorter, the delay to maybe 4 or maybe 3. Okay, so now even if you increase this to 100, it doesn't fire. So this is a very important concept, that once an axon fires, it takes some time to recharge the capacitance, because the charge of the resting membrane potential lies on either side of the cell membrane. So it takes some time, and there is a period where it's absolutely refractory, regardless of how high you make it, the stimulus, it will not fire. And after some time, it will fire, but you need a higher, threshold. The amplitude needs to be higher. And after about 10, it comes back to normal. So with normal, amplitude, it fires. Notice that when I changed the amplitude from 100 to 65, it was slightly delayed. So the thresholds have changed. So I encourage you to play with. You have so many parameters to play with. So if you get nothing else from the course, if you get an idea of how the action potential works, that would be really great. So thank you very much. And the next demo will be on voltage clamps.